Thank you very much. So this talk, much like an old text adventure game, comes with feelies. So I have a physical example of a piece of cross stitch. I'm going to hand it over to Loris to pass around in the audience. I should also mention that this is a safe space for post-lunch naps. If you fall asleep, I will not be mad at you. If the person next to you falls asleep, that's okay. So despite the kind of chill vibes that I tried to emit just now, this talk does have a rather polemic title. And sort of the thing that brought me around to thinking about why I wanted to talk about usability in command line interfaces is I think that there are two portable platforms, the browser and the terminal. And I think that there is a lot of energy focused at making nice software for users that hangs out over here, and a lot of energy spent making nice software for developers that hangs out over here. And I think that users deserve to have this too. Some disclaimers to sort of walk back the massive claims that I made in my title. I'm going to say some things about GUIs. I understand that not all GUIs. There's a level of care that it's necessary to take in designing any interface that users are going to interact with, and taking the appropriate amount of care, regardless of whether it's command line tools, a text user interface, a web app, a game, whatever. Taking that kind of care and thinking about these kinds of things are important and will lead to a better user experience. That said, there's a bunch of shit that GUIs do that I don't like, and I'm going to talk about it. There's another disclaimer, which is I can't find a better way to say this. So if you are a person who eats cereal in the morning, and you look at the back of the cereal box that's in front of you all the time, and you have the back of that cereal box memorized because you can't help but read it, you're my people. And I think that this is correlated with a certain level of kind of pleasure in and facility with working with text. Not everybody feels that way about working with text. Not everybody lots of people have a choice about whether they read words that are in front of them, unlike me. And lots of people also don't like typing, unlike me. So there is a certain amount of pleasure that these people are maybe not going to take in interacting with command line tools that I do take. And I'm not trying to say that those people are wrong. I get it. But the world's for you right now, and I want a little bit of world for me. I was also inspired by Loris's talk this morning because I think that interacting with the command line and using command line tools is the thing that feels closest to magic that I get to do. We often talk about the runes for doing a particular thing or invoking a particular command. I think this is something of a common feeling of having maybe written out a long pipeline of commands and hitting enter and feeling like you've just cast a spell. The things have gone off to do your bidding. And I think the point that I was trying to get to in this talk, which I didn't realize until this morning, which incidentally is why you might notice a bit of roughness in this talk, it's undergone a refactor recently, is I don't want there to be muggles. I don't want there to be people for whom the magic is inaccessible for what I think is no good reason. I want us all to be wizards. So hard left turn. What's cross-stitch? I'm going to talk about why I think command line tools are fun to use in the context of visual art that I find particularly compelling, partly because of its analogs to pixel art design and early design in, for example, 8-bit computers. So cross-stitch is a form of sewing where you use literally one stitch. It's the cross-stitch. You go one slash, you go another slash, you do them on top of each other, they make an X. And you do a whole bunch of X's and you get a shape. And you do a whole bunch of that over and over again and you get a picture. And you do an awful lot of that and you get a pretty picture. So something that you see in a lot of cross-stitch designs is these repeated borders. So you'll often see that there's some text, maybe some art, and then this border piece. So it's not immediately obvious to someone who's looking at the design as it will exist once the person who's cross-stitching it is finished, but this border is what takes up the vast majority of the time in your design. And it's also really, really, really fiddly to lay out in sort of a conventional GUI. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to show you a really complicated one first, though. So this piece is a little bit too complicated for me to show you in my in-browser viewer. So this is a piece that really shows like how much the border explodes when the size of the design explodes, and it also shows that I was lying and there are in fact 2 stitches that you use in cross-stitch. So this is the instructions that the human will interpret as a way to create the cross-stitch. This is your postscript and you are the printer, basically. So each one of these symbols is one of those X stitches, and then each one of these is a stitch that you take on the borders of the weave of the fabric, so it makes like a little line. So when you buy a cross-stitch pattern, a design, you get a PDF that looks something like this. You get something that usually has a preview so that you can look at this and look at your empty piece of cloth or your piece of cloth with like 3 stitches in it and go, oh my God, okay. And then there's a key for each. These are usually shown as symbols. Sometimes the symbols are colored to help you figure out like, okay, which of these grids is which color. And the symbols help you tell ones that look really similar apart. And then you have every single pixel in your design that you are going to sit and you are going to stitch. Oops, that's not the right desktop. So having seen that, you might ask, why on God's earth would anyone do this? To which I say that's a great question. I've made a lot of these and I still don't know why. People like them. That's probably the best reason that I have, but if I ever figure it out, I'll let you know. That said, other people do it. And the way that most people do these kinds of designs, spoiler, sorry, is they have an interface that looks like this, where you set 1 pixel at a time. Maybe you have a tool that will take some vector fonts and rasterize them. Maybe you have like an eraser tool, but the kind of core idea of what you're doing here is you're just going to take some threads and you're just going to twiddle all these pixels. And there are a lot of applications that will let you do this. Some of them are based on the web. Some of them are native applications. Some of them cost money. Some of them don't. A somewhat common theme is that if it's free to create a pattern, create a design or create a cross-stitch in one of these tools, it will cost you money to get the actual instructions. So if I go through and I painstakingly twiddle all of my individual pixels here, and then I'm really happy with my design, in most tools, when I go, okay, give me the PDF so that I can go do it, it's like, $5? Which I personally was not super impressed by. So there are a couple of aspects of that I think are not great. First off, some of the best-selling cross-stitch patterns are actually not things that you would go in and individually pixel twiddle to do designs on. They're just shit posts. It's a shit post with a border. Like you don't want like Photoshop for that. You want like meme generator that has the picture of the dog and you put in your top text and your bottom text. So, all right. That sucks. The people want shit posts. I want shit posts. So I decided I'm going to go out there, I'm going to make my own tools for designing cross-stitch patterns. And at first I started off making a web application to do this that looked just exactly like all the other ones. It was just going to be a little bit nicer for using text. It was going to use raster fonts because you're outputting to basically a bitmap anyway. It's going to be fine. But as I was designing these tools, I realized that there were all of these factors that I missed from programming that I was making a tool for users that didn't have, right? Like, I was making something that tried to do the magic for you and didn't let you do the magic. I was making the wizard that hangs out on the hill and just gives you fetch quests. and won't do anything nice for you until you do something nice for it. And doesn't you have like no visibility into what the wizard wants, why the wizard wants anything. It's just not fun to interact with. There are some really nice ideas about how to nicely build CLI tools so that we don't fall into the same pitfalls that many GUIs have. I was particularly inspired by the site clig.dev, which is the command line user interface guide, if I remember correctly. I highly recommend this site if you do any design of command line tools. And the quote that stuck out to me in thinking about how I wanted to do design and how I wanted to make visual art was each operation that I was thinking that I wanted to do is indeed part in a larger system. And I have control over whether or not it will be a well-behaved part. And how those things glue together is also how nice it is for the user. I also wanted to give a shout out to AppleScript because this isn't solely a command line tool thing, but if you don't have a fairly complete way of doing arbitrary operations within a set of GUIs, it's really hard to get that same set of advantages. The only system that I personally know of that was mainstream and did a good job with this was AppleScript, which I never had the pleasure of using, but I have seen several people give kind of eulogies for AppleScript, which I will admit I don't know whether or not it's dead. Extolling its virtues in the area of being able to glue together these GUI operations in the same way that you would the command line. So another advantage of command line tools is you can just have a whole bunch of like very clear instructions for what to do. As a person who used to teach seminar courses for how to use various different kinds of GUIs, if you want people to be able to follow your instructions, you have to give them a printout of every single screen transition you're going to do. Because if you're doing some demonstration or you're playing a video, once somebody misses one step, they're toast. So in order for that process to be recoverable, you really do have to have this referenceable record of every single operation that you do, which is if you have a shot of your entire screen and a bitmap of every single pixel that's on there for everything that you do, really, really resource intensive. I would frequently print 150 pages before a seminar and put 100 of them in the recycling the next time we revise course materials. It sucks. And another thing that is really nice about command line interfaces is copy and paste is an incredible tool, and we shouldn't just like assume that because we're developers, we're the only people who want to use it. There's the obvious case of like, okay, you can copy a command line from like a website that's telling you how to do stuff, but there's also a non-obvious, like maybe a slightly less obvious case if you've never been a maintainer, for example, of being able to easily get error information back out from people. This is something that can be really hard to do with GUIs. I've seen people draw the error box and just like put a little squiggly line for the text. I've luckily never seen that happen for CLI tools, but the day might be coming. And this way of having this stuff in a way that is easy for a person to scan visually, easy for a search engine to scan and index and link to, is extremely valuable. I personally like being able to do this a lot better than, for example, having to watch a YouTube video of someone trying to solve my problem. Another thing that's really, really incredible about dealing with command line tools is it gives me a way of expressing dependencies between different tools in a way that I can control. So anything that I can find real output from, I can use that as a parameter to another thing. There are a lot of applications, like these sort of maximal GUI applications that have some idea of you have some dependencies within your thing. Like if you have a slideshow, you can link to an external video. You can link to external images when they change. You can get new versions of that in your slideshow. But you're limited to the sorts of things that, for example, PowerPoint understands. And it's also you can also only express the kinds of relationships that PowerPoint expects you to want to express. So you can say, like, I have this Excel thing, make me a chart. It depends on this stuff. That's fine. That's what PowerPoint expects. But if you have an output of some other process, it's a lot more difficult. So when I'm dealing with command line tools, I really like that I can have any particular thing about my design literally depend on the phase of the moon. It's good when I do it. And I have a hot take about command line tools, which is specifically aimed at someone that I talked with before this talk, which there's a lot of talk about discoverability in command line interfaces that I think is maybe unfair criticism, because we give a lot of grace to extremely complicated GUI programs that don't have a good way of guiding the user. I personally don't think that what you get when you open up Photoshop for the first time and want to make a new image is any better than what happens when you just type git in it and hit tab and expect to get help. So, having said all that, in my goal to figure out how I can make these nice tools for making designs to make my shitpost generator, I did accidentally make a layout engine. I didn't set out to do this. The individual pieces that I was trying to put together were just a text renderer, a thing that can automatically lay things out. That's the spoiler. A thing that can automatically center stuff with respect to other things. So, like if you're making if it's going to be a pillow, you want all the words in the middle of the pillow so people can see it, even when the edges of the pillow are crunched in like that. But it turned out that I was making a crappy version of LaTeX. Which is why, when I went to go make slides, and I thought, I need a layout engine, I thought, I already have a layout engine. I already have a viewer. So you might have noticed if you looked at the Feely that this looks pretty similar to this banner here. These slides are just cross-stitch patterns. So yeah, there are a lot of pieces that I ended up needing in order to come up with my own very easy sort of make files and just files for my own equivalent to have a nice poop. But the really interesting parts in terms of writing software and playing with things and coming up with interesting test cases were this raster font processing, where I got to explore a lot of really fun old 8-bit fonts. There's a whole world of fantastic low-resolution fonts out there, most of which I will say are prettier than this one, that also gave me opportunities to write a whole bunch of font parsers and just generally do a whole bunch of yak shave bullshit. That was a great time. There's also, so I've mentioned a lot about text and about building the kind of textual parts of the cross-stitch pattern, but there is also you need clip art basically a lot of the time in order to do these repeating borders, and sometimes your shitpost needs a Doge for it. So there is another piece of open source software that does the thing everyone immediately asks whether cross-stitch software does, which is take a bitmap image, take every single pixel, and make it a stitch. It turns out you don't want to do this for various reasons, usually. But if you're starting from, for example, a 16 by 16 icon, a favicon from somebody's web app, this is actually a pretty reasonable thing to do. So the program that I've managed to shoehorn into my stuff is a Python program called each. So if you are in need of cross-stitch patterns for example, a picture of a cat, check out each. This is, so I wasn't really sure where to fit this in this talk, but part of what I want to do with things like this project is stop anybody else from having to make them unless they want to. Thinking about how much work it would have, how much like sad, sorry, sloggy work it would have been to make my own version of a thing that can take 24-bit color space, map it down to the approximately 500 colors that you get of cross-stitch thread, do light correction, do CCAM stuff for like colors look different if they're next to other colors, crunch things down into a reasonable number of pixels. That all sounds boring, unlike the stuff that I wanted to do, which all sounds interesting. So it was really nice to be able to just take some off-the-shelf boring parts. And my goal for this project is both that it's fun for me and that it saves someone else from having to do their boring parts. Somebody who really cares quite a lot about color matching, for example. So there's one more piece that I wanted to talk about. Ooh, you can tell that I got some shell interpolation there. Those are supposed to all be dollar signs. Well, that's my PID. Enjoy that, everybody. So monetization. I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about traditional GUIs for dealing with cross-stitch, where they will lock your design that you made yourself up behind a paywall. It's really hard to do that kind of thing when you're distributing command line tools. And it's really hard for your boss to force you to do that kind of thing when you're distributing command line tools. It's not impossible, but it's harder. It's also a lot harder to, for example, serve people ads that they don't want to see. And users who are using command line tools can do things like pipe yes to your thing. So that if you're saying like, have you seen the ad? It's like, don't bother me again. In fact, there's a lot of don't bother me about this that I really enjoy being able to do with command line tools that even with tools, I'm going to date myself, but even with tools like GreaseMonkey and with browser extensions, it's a lot fiddlier still to do this in most web apps. So I should actually speak a little bit more about monetization. So my monetization strategy for this set of software is LOL. I use it to make patterns. I put my patterns on Etsy. Occasionally somebody buys one, including the test one that's just the word but. Somebody paid $0.25 for that, so if you're here, thank you. Are you okay? But most of the work I did on this project, I did at the Recurse Center. And I wanted to give them a special thanks both for giving me the space to explore a weird thing that I thought would be fun and good, and also for some concrete help getting to this convention. I also wanted to thank Jeff Fowler, who's speaking later today, for talking over some of this stuff with me. Thomas Leonard for the same thing. I wanted to shout out CLI if you didn't grab that earlier and you're interested. And also my parents, who were my introduction into command line interfaces. And both of whom are much less interested in computing than they used to be, partly because it is really difficult for them to use systems with a ton of hidden state that are always trying to thwart what they want to do. And for example, serving them ads in the start menu, a thing that I just learned actually happens on God's earth. So after this talk, I'm going to be in the audience continuing to be horrified by this new information. Thank you. Say again?
I think they also do it in the lock screen now too.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
No!
Also, Mindy, my interest your mom and dad on Windows 11. You should update. Like, you should really update. Please update. Do update now.
I'll tell them.
That's my relationship with my home computer now. Yeah. So, are there any questions? Let's go. Okay, let me check the time. So, yes.
Did you make the VA find primes cross stitch that's hung up by the Recurse Center?
Oh, there's one at the Recurse Center? Oh, yeah, I did.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked that one so much, I made another one for me.
More questions? Raise your hand. Okay, it's there.
So when you were talking about using colors to mix, is it like legal in cross stitch to use for one cross two colors?
Yes. I mean, so legal is a weird question, right? Like you can physically do it. Like nobody's gonna stop you. Yeah. Cross-stitch jail is very easy to break out of. Part of my inspiration for doing so I have some automated stuff for doing borders. Part of my inspiration for doing this was a project that I did where they didn't meet up, and I had to do this to cheat at the end. I made a big ASCII table that had like a complicated ribbon around it, and I realized at the end that my extremely tedious arithmetic that I had done by hand instead of making a computer do it had gone wrong, and this was something that I needed to do. I've never seen it on a chart, and I think you'd have to like put a little annotation on it because people wouldn't really know how to read it, but you can do it.
Okay, so it's not common to do that?
No.
Okay.
It's more common, so when you're doing cross-stitch, you usually have these threads that are actually 6 threads, and you take and you use either 2 or 3 for like the common sizes of cross-stitch. It's more common to take one of those threads out and use a thread of another color to get kind of to get blending. Than it is to do like one cross versus another cross.
Okay.
Mm. And that's your dithering.
Why exactly is it a bad idea to take like a sprite bitmap and convert it into a cross stitch?
So a sprite bitmap is actually a totally fine idea. The problem is that people take these enormous like photographs, and then they're like, why does it say that it's going to take me like 20,000 hours to do this? And it's like, well, it's a lot of pixels. And also because the color space of the threads is so much smaller than the color space of your camera, you're going to get like down conversion that makes weird effects. For stuff that was designed for a limited palette and for low resolution, it's great. I really like making stuff like this. I made one, this is just going to be Mindy shows off cool stuff moment, but so I made one, I made a different shit post. It's not gonna work. Okay, I made one that's if it sucks, hit the bricks, and it's the dancing skeletons from Monkey Island 2. Yeah, like there's some intellectual property concerns with that. There's a reason that's not on my Etsy, but for making designs, it's super great.
More questions? Any?
Well, how can one get started cross-stitching?
There is a page, Cross-Stitch Carpentry, which has very clear instructions on things like, here's some tricks for threading a needle, here's how you would divide the threads and figure out how many threads you want. The stuff that you need is really limited. It's the things that you want are something to stitch on, something to stitch with, and at least one needle. And if you know any old ladies, they will be able to hook you up. I think like a good 60% of the materials that I have are just from somebody's aunt or grandmother, or occasionally sister or brother, who was doing it for a while and then gave up and has like a whole bunch of crap that they want to give you. So if you're interested in starting, don't pay for anything. Just ask around.
How do you call the textile breadboard? Like the
this is Ada cloth. It's a special, it is a somewhat specialized kind of fabric with like a really chonky weave. So that you can, so that the intersections between the warp and the weft are pretty big. This one is 14 intersections per inch, which I think is like 6 per centimeter. It's a pretty standard size. It's a little big, but they make all different resolutions.
Any more questions? I think I don't see any other hand. Okay, then I have one last question for you, Mindy. So you mentioned Monkey Island. Have you played the new Monkey Island?
I have. I kind of, so I had 2 days to play it before I had to come to Europe. So I did that instead of a lot of other stuff that it would have been way more responsible to do because I didn't want spoilers and I knew a lot of friends were going to want to talk to me about it.
Nice, fair.
I think it's really good. And that's not just a fan person opinion. I think it's genuinely a good game. If you like point and click adventure games at all, you should try it.
I agree. Okay, last question. Can I keep this?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Do you want me to finish it first?
No, I like it incomplete.
Okay.
It's awesome.
All right.
Please give it up for me.